The year is 1191. The place is the dusty, sun-baked plains outside the city of Arsuf, on the coast of the Holy Land. Two armies face each other across a stretch of sand and scrub. On one side stands Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, the most powerful Muslim ruler in the world. His army is vast, horsemen, archers, infantry, and he has never lost a major battle. He has already retaken Jerusalem from the Crusaders. He has already destroyed the Frankish army at Hattin. He believes that the Third Crusade will end like the others in defeat, disease, and despair. On the other side stands a man who does not know how to lose. He is tall, over 6 feet, rare for his time. He has red gold hair, eyes the color of the sea in a storm, and a temper that has earned him as many enemies as allies. He is King of England, but he barely speaks English. He has spent only 6 months of his reign in England. He prefers the heat of battle to the chill of a throne room. He prefers the clash of swords to the whisper of courtiers. His name is Richard, and his enemies call him Coeur de Lion, the Lionheart. Today, Saladin will test him. The Muslim cavalry will charge. The Crusader ranks will tremble. Richard's own generals will beg him to hold the line. But Richard knows something Saladin does not. He knows that his knights, outnumbered, exhausted, and thirsty, are the finest heavy cavalry in the world. He knows that if he releases them at the right moment, they will cut through the Muslim army like a sword through silk. He waits. He watches. He holds his temper, the hardest thing for a man called Lionheart. Then, when Saladin's horsemen are tangled in their own attack, when their arrows have been spent, when their horses are panting, Richard gives the signal. The trumpets sound. The knights lower their lances, the ground shakes, and the Lionheart charges. This is the man who fought Saladin to a stalemate, who terrified the Muslim world, who became a legend not because he was a good king, he was not, but because he was the greatest battlefield commander of his age. Today we are going to meet the real Richard the Lionheart, not the Hollywood hero, not the Robin Hood villain, the man, the warrior, the king who would rather fight than rule. To understand Richard, you must first understand the world that made him. He was born in 1157 in Oxford, England, the third son of Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine. He was never meant to be king. His older brother, Henry the young king, was the heir. Richard was raised in his mother's court in Poitiers, in southern France. He grew up speaking French, Occitan specifically, and wrote poetry. He was educated, cultured, and musically talented. He could have been a troubadour, but the Plantagenet family was not a family. It was a nest of vipers. Henry II fought with his wife, Eleanor, who later led a rebellion against him. The sons fought with each other. Richard fought with his father. When Henry the young king died in 1183, Richard became the heir, but his other brother, Geoffrey, and his youngest brother, John, were also ambitious. The family feuds were so vicious that at one point, Richard allied with the King of France, the traditional enemy, against his own father. Henry II died in 1189, broken and betrayed. Richard inherited the throne. He was 32 years old. He had already proven himself as a military commander in the wars against his father and in the rebellions in Aquitaine, but he had no interest in ruling England. England, for Richard, was a source of money, nothing more. He needed money because he had made a vow. In 1187, Jerusalem had fallen to Saladin. The Christian world was shocked. Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade. Richard, like his father and his brothers, had taken the cross. Unlike them, he meant to keep his vow. He sold offices, lands, and titles. He taxed the English so heavily that he later joked, "I would have sold London itself if I could find a buyer." He raised a fleet, gathered an army, and in July 1190, he set out for the Holy Land. He would never spend more than 6 months in England again. The Third Crusade was a disaster from the start. The Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick Barbarossa, drowned in a river in Anatolia. His army scattered. The King of France, Philip II, sailed with Richard, but hated him. The two kings had been allies against Henry II, but now they were rivals. They bickered over strategy, over supplies, over the kingship of Jerusalem. They arrived in the Holy Land separately. Richard stopped first in Sicily, then in Cyprus, where he conquered the island in a lightning campaign, his first major victory. He married Berengaria of Navarre in Cyprus, though the marriage was political and apparently never consummated. Richard had no legitimate children. He may have been gay or bisexual. The chronicles suggest close relationships with men, including Philip of France, and later his prisoner and friend, the troubadour Blondel. We will never know for certain. What we know is that Richard was more interested in war than in women. By June 1191, he was in Acre, a coastal city that had been under siege by the Crusaders for 2 years. The Muslim garrison was starving. Saladin was trying to relieve them. Richard arrived, took command, and within weeks the city surrendered. But Richard and Philip of France quarreled over the division of spoils. Philip, who was ill and tired of the crusade, returned to France. Richard was left in command of the Crusader forces. He was now the sole leader of the Third Crusade, and Saladin was waiting. The military genius of Richard the Lionheart was not in grand strategy. He had no grand strategy beyond defeat Saladin and take Jerusalem. It was in tactics, leadership, and the use of heavy cavalry. Richard understood that his knights, though few, were the most powerful shock troops in the world. A fully armored knight on a charging horse could punch through infantry lines, scatter archers, and break the morale of any army. The problem was that Muslim armies, light cavalry, horse archers, skirmishers, were experts at avoiding the charge. They would shoot arrows from a distance, then retreat. They would draw the knights out, then surround them. They would feign retreat, then turn and attack. Richard had studied these tactics. He had seen Crusader armies destroyed by them, most famously at Hattin in 1187. He was determined not to make the same mistakes. At the Battle of Arsuf, on September 7th, 1191, Richard showed his mastery. He marched his army down the coast from Acre to Jaffa, keeping the sea on his right flank to protect him from encirclement. Saladin's army followed him, harassing his rear and flanks. The Muslim horse archers shot thousands of arrows. The Crusader infantry, protected by their heavy shields and crossbows, held their ground. Richard's knights wanted to charge. They begged him, they cursed him, they said he was a coward. Richard held them back. He knew that a premature charge would fail, the knights would tire, their horses would tire, and they would be surrounded. He waited until the Muslim cavalry had committed fully to the attack, until their horses were panting, until their arrows were almost spent. Then he ordered the Hospitallers, a military order, to charge. They broke the Muslim right flank. Then he ordered the rest of his knights to charge. They smashed into the Muslim center. Saladin's army, which had never been broken in open battle, broke. They fled. Richard pursued, but not too far. He reformed his army and continued his march. The victory at Arsuf was not a slaughter. Saladin lost perhaps 7,000 men, Richard about 700. But it was a psychological victory. For the first time, Saladin had been beaten in the field by a Christian general. The legend of the Lionheart was born. After Asif, Richard marched to Jaffa, then to within sight of Jerusalem. He could see the holy city from the hills. His men begged him to attack. The Patriarch of Jerusalem offered to crown him king of Jerusalem. But Richard refused. He knew that his army was too small to besiege Jerusalem successfully. The city's walls were strong. Saladin's army was still intact, and winter was coming. If Richard besieged Jerusalem, he would be trapped between Saladin and the city walls, with no supply line, no reinforcements, and no hope of relief. He was a warrior, not a fool. He withdrew to the coast. Saladin, impressed by Richard's restraint, offered a truce. Richard refused. He wanted Jerusalem. Instead, he marched south to Ascalon, rebuilt its fortifications, and spent the winter planning his next campaign. In the spring of 1192, Saladin attacked Jaffa. Richard, hearing the news, sailed from Acre with a small force, perhaps 80 knights, a few hundred infantry, and some crossbowmen. They broke the Muslim right flank. Then he ordered the rest of his knights to charge. They smashed into the Muslim center. Saladin's army, which had never been broken in open battle, broke. They fled. Richard pursued, but not too far. He reformed his army and continued his march. The victory at Arsuf was not a slaughter. Saladin lost perhaps 7,000 men, Richard about 700. But it was a psychological victory. For the first time, Saladin had been beaten in the field by a Christian general. The legend of the Lionheart was born. After Asif, Richard marched to Jaffa, then to within sight of Jerusalem. He could see the holy city from the hills. His men begged him to attack. The Patriarch of Jerusalem offered to crown him king of Jerusalem. But Richard refused. He knew that his army was too small to besiege Jerusalem successfully. The city's walls were strong. Saladin's army was still intact, and winter was coming. If Richard besieged Jerusalem, he would be trapped between Saladin and the city walls, with no supply line, no reinforcements, and no hope of relief. He was a warrior, not a fool. He withdrew to the coast. Saladin, impressed by Richard's restraint, offered a truce. Richard refused. He wanted Jerusalem. Instead, he marched south to Ascalon, rebuilt its fortifications, and spent the winter planning his next campaign. In the spring of 1192, Saladin attacked Jaffa. Richard, hearing the news, sailed from Acre with a small force, perhaps 80 knights, a few hundred infantry, and some crossbowmen. Now came the dark part of Richard's story, the part that shows why he was a terrible king and a poor strategist. On his way back to England, Richard was shipwrecked near Venice. He tried to travel through Germany in disguise. He was recognized, captured, and imprisoned by Duke Leopold of Austria, whom Richard had insulted during the Crusade. Leopold handed Richard over to the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry VI. The emperor demanded a ransom of 150,000 marks, an astronomical sum twice the annual income of the English crown. Richard's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, raised the money by taxing England into poverty. His brother, John, tried to seize the throne, allying with the King of France. England was in chaos. Richard did not care. He wrote songs in his prison cell. He negotiated with the emperor. He waited. In February 1194, the ransom was paid. Richard was released. He returned to England for a few weeks, long enough to be crowned again, just to make sure everyone knew who was king. Then he left for France to fight the King of France, Philip II, who had taken advantage of Richard's absence to seize Norman lands. For the next 5 years, Richard waged war against Philip. He built the magnificent Château Gaillard, a castle so advanced that it was considered impregnable. He fought skirmishes, sieges, and battles. He never lost. In March 1199, he was besieging the castle of Châlus-Chabrol in the Limousin region of France. A defender on the wall shot a crossbow bolt. Richard, who was walking around without his chainmail, an act of carelessness or overconfidence, was hit in the left shoulder. The bolt lodged near his spine. A surgeon removed it, but botched the operation. The wound became gangrenous. Richard, knowing he was dying, sent for the crossbowman. He was a young man named Pierre Bazile. Richard forgave him, gave him 100 shillings, and ordered that he not be harmed. After Richard died on April 6, 1199, his mercenary captain Mercadier flayed Pierre alive anyway. Richard's heart was buried in Rouen. His entrails were buried in Châlus. His body was buried at Fontevraud Abbey, next to his father, Henry II. His effigy shows him lying with his eyes open, his hand on his sword, still ready to fight. He was 41 years old. He had reigned for 10 years. He had spent less than a year in England. He had no legitimate children. He left behind a bankrupt kingdom, a treacherous brother, and a legend that has only grown with time. So what can we learn from Richard the Lionheart? First, that courage is not the same as wisdom. Richard was fearless. He charged into battle, stood on beaches alone, faced down armies. That courage made him a great warrior and an inspiration to his men. But it also made him reckless. He died because he walked in front of a castle without armor. A wise king would have worn his mail. A wise king would not have gotten himself captured, bankrupting his kingdom. Richard was not wise. He was brave. And bravery without wisdom is a tragedy waiting to happen. Second, that a good warrior is not necessarily a good king. Richard was a brilliant battlefield commander. He was a terrible administrator. He had no interest in justice, taxation, law, or diplomacy. He left England to be ruled by others, and they ruled it badly. The great irony of Richard's life is that he is remembered as an English hero, but he despised England. He called it a cold, rainy island. He used it as a cash machine. His legacy in England is not one of good governance, but of romantic myth. Third, that respect between enemies is possible. Richard and Saladin never met, but they respected each other deeply. They exchanged gifts, they praised each other's courage, they fought hard, and then made peace. In an age of religious warfare, this mutual respect is remarkable. It is a lesson for all of us. You can fight your enemy and still honor him. Fourth, that legends are not the same as history. The Richard of legend, the hero of the Crusades, the brother of Robin Hood, the noble king, is mostly fiction. The real Richard was a flawed, violent, arrogant, and brilliant man. He was a great warrior and a poor king. He was a poet and a killer. He was a hero to his followers and a terror to his enemies. He was, in short, human. The legend is simpler. The legend is safer. But the truth is more interesting. And the truth is that Richard the Lionheart, for all his flaws, was one of the most extraordinary warriors ever to wear a crown. Today, you can see Richard's effigy at Fontevraud Abbey in France, lying next to his father and his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine. The tomb has been vandalized, restored, and moved, but the image remains. a tall man with a lion's heart, his hand on his sword, his eyes open to eternity. You can visit Chateau Gaillard, his masterpiece, now a ruin overlooking the Seine. You can walk the walls of Acre, where he fought. You can stand on the beach at Jaffa, where he charged alone against an army. And you can wonder, what if he had worn his armor that day? What if he had made peace with Saladin and gone back to Jerusalem? What if he had spent more time in England? History is full of what-ifs. But Richard the Lionheart did not live in what-ifs. He lived in the charge, the sword, the moment. He lived in the roar of the battlefield. He lived with a lion's heart. And that is why 800 years later we still remember his name, not because he was a good king. He was not. Because he was a warrior, the greatest warrior king of the Middle Ages, Richard the Lionheart. Bravery on the battlefield, a legend carved in stone and song, and a man who in the end was too brave for his own good. Requiescat in pace, Lionheart, your war is over, but your legend has just begun.